Hey, this is Ryan.
And this is Steve, and you're watching a 60-cycle hum clickbait video.
Clickbait special report.
Here's what's going to happen. We're going to talk about math.
I mean, if it's about Gibson, it's automatically clickbait.
That's true.
Right?
That's true. And if I'm involved, there's always math.
So last week I did a video that was very clickbaity and got a ton of views.
Yeah.
And it was about how I didn't like the pick guard on the new double cut juniors by Gibson. And there were...
Which I disagree with you on.
Okay. We'll save that for
But,
another time.
it's aesthetics, so who cares?
Sure. It's subjective. There were two main complaint comments on the video. Like, oh, why didn't you talk about the new standard? I made a video about that because they have to keep milking this.
Where we learned that dip switch is a great insult. Oh, you're a freaking dip switch, bro.
And then also people were complaining like, hey, how come you didn't talk about the prices? The prices are just awful. And when are they going to make a guitar like they used to that everyone could afford? And I was like, Steve, you're good at numbers. Let's do a video where we talk about the numbers of what Gibsons cost and discuss whether or not Gibsons are too expensive.
Yeah.
Or more expensive than they used to be, or unreasonably expensive compared to the past. So you did your numbers thing where you actually look at actual facts.
I looked at a bunch, actually,
statistics.
So I started out just looking at the last 5 years of pricing because that's readily available.
Yeah.
They're
still trying to sell all those guitars.
I actually pulled all of these prices off of the Gibson website.
Yeah, that's how easy it is.
And so there's some interesting trends in there, I thought. The Les Paul Standard, which is the flagship model, which I've also kind of like, some of the YouTube comments actually kind of gave me a new perspective on the Les Paul Standard model after the dip switch video, but I suppose we could save that for the podcast too.
Are you disagreeing with me or going to agree with me that it doesn't matter what it's called?
I didn't watch your video. I just read the comments.
That's honestly probably more interesting than the video.
I think the idea that the Standard is just the flagship and whatever they want to do with it, guess I'm giving away the podcast content.
Who cares?
That's just the flagship, and whatever they want to do, they do. And that the traditional model is the new, what used to be the Standard.
Sure.
I think that's probably the way we need to think about Gibson.
People are putting too much weight on the word standard.
Right. My big complaint with the 2015 lineup wasn't that they slapped G-Force tuners on their guitars. It's that they slapped G-Force tuners on every guitar,
every single guitar,
and brass nut on every guitar, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I found I thought was the first interesting thing is that in 2019 the Gibson Les Paul Standard, to get to the main event,
here we go,
is $3,400. It's $3,399. That's going to be the street price. That's
what year was that again?
That's right now. 2019 model.
$3,400.
So this is actually a price increase of 3% over last year.
That 3% is really going to dig into the bottom line of people buying $3,500 guitars.
Last year's instrument was $3,299.
So what is 3% out of that? Like,
it's $100.
It's $100.
It's about $100.
Quick math, Steve. I should have been able to do that.
So the thing that's actually kind of interesting about that too is it's a 3% increase, and generally, like in business, not that I've ever seen one of these because business is notoriously bad for the last 15 years.
You mean our whole professional lives?
Yeah. That a cost of living adjustment, like the standard cost of living adjustment, is like 2 to 3%.
Sure.
If you actually get one of those raises. And if you do,
I never have.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
So a 3% price hike, I'm not saying it's justifiable.
Freaking millennials.
I'm just saying like it's $100 on a $3,300 guitar. If you can afford $3,300, you probably could have afforded $3,400.
Yeah.
Where I actually found the biggest price hikes consistently were from 2017 to 2018, where both this Les Paul Standard model and the Les Paul Studio model, well, the Les Paul Standard went up 18%, and the Les Paul Studio model went up 10%.
Let me show you this real quick. Steve has a bar graph down here.
Oh.
Maybe you send me this file, Steve.
I sent you those files.
Oh, good.
I sent you the pictures of each of these graphs.
Okay.
So the Les Paul Standard in 2015 was actually $3,759. That was when they went from, like, I want to say they went from like about $2,800 to like $3,700. And that's when people really freaked out in 2015. Of course, in
2015 was insane for Gibson anyways.
2016 was the year that we predicted that they would come out with their liquor technology, which they did not.
Yeah, what's up with that? How come they never came out with
Gibson.
that liquor software?
Didn't we also predict that they would get John Mayer as a spokesperson?
I don't think so.
I thought there was something
I don't
about
think
John.
I was thinking about John Mayer.
I thought
back
there was
then.
something about John Mayer on that poster.
Probably. I'll pull up that poster and I'll flash it up here. And you guys can see
So
it.
anyway, so in 2016, the prices dropped pretty much across the board, except for the Les Paul Studio. The Les Paul Studio model was actually dirt cheap in 2015. Comparably, it was $1229.
Yeah.
And in 2016, it goes up to $1499.
From $12.99 to
$14.99. So it stays at $14.99 for 2016 and 2017. Most of the prices stayed stable from 2016 to 2017.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Steve. I can do math too. That's like a $300 price jump, right?
No, that's like a $250 price jump. $270 price jump.
Close enough to 300.
All right. So anyway,
come on, that's Ryan math right there. I got close enough.
The other model that saw it saw a price drop. It saw a 21% price drop. There are some actually really big drops from 2015 to 2016. The standard went down 25%. The traditional went down 20%, and the LP Classic went down 21%. So that's kind of like.
That's this year versus 2015.
No, that's 2015 versus 2016.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right now, most of the models are cheaper than they were in 2015, with the exception of the Studio. The traditional is like $80 cheaper. The Classic is actually $20 more.
I wish you had 2014 numbers because there was like that huge jump from 2014
Yeah,
to
2014 was a little tricky to dig up, and of course, they're
trying to hide it from
kind
us.
of just like. There's a bunch of articles that just say prices are going up 30%
on 2014
from 2014 to 2015.
Oh, okay.
And the large justifier for
I'm
all of it.
betting we could say that 2014 probably looked a lot like 2016 as far as prices goes because they were
I think
trying
they
to
did.
backpedal as hard as they could.
Yeah. So what we've seen since then is kind of a slow incremental increase. Again, the standard, if you put 2016 as your baseline, they don't go up in 2017, but from 17 to 18, they go up 18%, and then they go up another 3% from 2018 to 2019. The Les Paul Studio pricing has slowly gone up. It's been, again, same thing. It was stable 2016, 2017, goes up 10%, 17 to 18. I realize I said all this already. The one thing that was actually really weird to look at is Gibson's been really inconsistent with their budget model pricing.
Yeah.
In terms of like, sometimes they just don't really have a budget model. So this year's big announcement was the Les Paul
cut Junior?
DC Junior.
Yeah.
Which is at $899 is actually one of the cheaper double cut, or not double cut, but cheaper budget models. Mm-hmm. Last year's LP Junior single cut was $1,500.
Wow.
The year before that,
that's only one cut.
Yeah, the year before that,
you get double the cuts for cheaper now.
Their faded model, which I believe was a studio faded, was $899. The year before that, they had a CM model, which is a single pickup carved top.
You really
at
have all the numbers, Steve. $699. Are they out of their mind?
So it's like these prices just kind of like really fluctuate on the low end.
Yeah.
This year, there's not even a faded model announced. So they're doing satin finishes, but not necessarily a faded finish.
You got to buy a non-faded Les Paul and fade it yourself at home now. What a ripoff.
I actually did the SG pricing, but I ran out of time to prepare those in. And
I think the Les Paul pricing is more what people are complaining about and talking about. It's more the standard of Gibson prices.
Yeah.
Once you get into SGs and Flying Vs and
comparatively,
it's more niche.
Comparatively, the SG, even at its most expensive, is relatively affordable compared to a Les. I think the SG standard this year is going to be $1,500, so it's over 50% cheaper than the Les Paul standard.
Here's something I want to know, and this is on you people who can comment down below. If you're someone who is complaining about the prices of Gibson guitars, what do you think they should be priced at? Like realistically, I'm not saying
Right.
like, oh, a Les Paul should be $100 and I could afford it. I'm like, what do you realistically think they should be charging? And I'm not at all being defensive and being like, oh, these prices are fine. I'm just wondering what the counterpoint of that argument is. Like, what would you expect Gibson to charge for? What is it? The Les Paul traditional,
Right.
in 2019.
Right.
If they made a major adjustment for 2020, what would you expect to see across the board? So comment that down below.
I would just say, just to launch the conversation, I think one of the problems that a lot of people have with the Gibson pricing is when you look at once you kind of break that $3,000 line, you're in the territory of well, I can go
Some really, really great stuff.
Well, you're in the territory of I can go to Guitar Center and get this at, $3,400.
Yeah.
Or I can find a guy who like I can get the pickups I want and this and that.
There are definitely people who will build you just about whatever you can dream up in that price range. And they won't be like top like name recognizable small builders, but you're going to be able to find someone who will like build whatever you want in that price range.
And the flip side of it is I'm already predicting the counter argument is, well, if I pay $3,400 for a Les Paul, I know in 10 years if I have to sell it, I'm still going to be able to sell it for $2,500. Whereas if I get a no name, or a small builder, and in 10 years he just doesn't exist, then I'm going to struggle to sell that for $2,500.
But you still get exactly what you want, and if you're using it as a player's instrument, then that depreciation doesn't matter because you're using it as a tool for what you're doing.
Right, but I'm saying like in terms of like if you have a family emergency where it's like I need to sell something quick, if you're going to sell a Les Paul guitar, a Gibson Les Paul versus the local luthier version of a Les Paul, the Gibson Les Paul is going to sell a lot faster.
Yeah. But also in that price range, you can get some big name brand guitars that are incredible and undeniably really fantastic. And you can get some really, really good PRSs in that price range all day long. You can start buying Rickenbackers that price range.
I've seen some people talk about saying like the PRSs, like it's one of those things. I don't know if it's people's preferences, generalized experiences. But some people say like, oh, above $3,000, Gibson is a much better guitar than a PRS. But I've also seen
that's also
the other way around.
It's also subjective.
Right.
Like I would much rather have the stylings of a Les Paul than a PRS just because I like a more classic look in that sort of direction where PRS just really isn't my style. I can appreciate them as a builder, that they make high quality guitars, but it's just not my look. So yeah, I feel like I would still go for a Les Paul style over a PRS.
We did spend a couple minutes looking at some like vintage pricing.
Yeah, we should probably pull those up.
Yeah, so you
had like an inflation calculator you were using.
So in 1959,
I'm pulling that up right now.
A Gibson Les Paul. There was no standard model. There's only, I believe, a custom.
Well, how did they know what the standard was if they didn't have a standard model in 59, Steve? How did they set the standard?
I don't know. But it was $300.
Right.
It's like $307
the
with
Les
the case.
Paul model was $265 and $42 for the case. So yeah, $300.
Right.
Just about even.
So I found an inflation calculator.
All right.
Punched that in, and that would convert to $2,600 now.
Okay. So that's kind of in the neighborhood of the non-standard versions of the Les Paul for 2019. I mean, inflation calculators there's a lot of like things to consider there. It's kind of an average of a lot of things.
Yeah.
How did they come up with that number? It's like, what did a loaf of bread cost versus now? What was minimum wage versus now?
Exactly.
How much would it cost to go see Jaws 1 versus the Meg?
My gosh.
You know?
So actually, if you compare
Jaws
that
1
to
didn't come out in 59.
If you compare that to the Les Paul traditional though, which is $2,800, like you're pretty close to being in the same ballpark. It is $200 more, but again, like at that point, we're talking about a less than 10% difference between those two prices,
which is kind of crazy that it stayed so stable. Maybe that's how they're pricing themselves, is they're relying on an inflation calculator.
Oh my gosh. If you were to jump ahead to 1974, which is another catalog we found, the Gibson Les Paul standard was $650, which actually apparently the economy in 1974 wasn't doing so hot because $650. Wait, does this mean it's doing well or doing bad?
I don't know. I don't know what anything means anymore. I'm just a millennial.
I punched it into the inflation calculator, and that's actually 30. Well, it depends on which sociologist you talk to.
Okay, tell me the price, Steve.
3324. So
what year was that?
1974 Les Paul Standard was $650.
Okay, and in today's money, that's over $3,000.
It's over $3,300. So that's basically what the current Les Paul Standard is priced at.
Well, you think about like if your parents bought their house in the 70s or the early 80s, like what they paid.
Yeah.
And it's like compared to what you pay for a house now, it's just like, yeah, things are crazy now.
I'm looking at what the cost of a house is now versus the cost of a house 5 years ago, and things are crazy now.
Yeah, no kidding. We're all going to get depressed now and go gorge ourselves on avocado toast and cereals that we won't eat because we're millennials.
Yeah.
We're not millennials.
In 1980, the Les Paul Standard package was $950, which is 20 would inflate to $2,907 in the modern dollar.
What I'm getting here is that Les Pauls have always been expensive.
Yeah.
Like now, more expensive. More expensive than I'd be interested in paying for a 1980.
One thing I do wonder about with these inflation calculators is, and I realize if there's a hardcore economist out there, they could probably have some fun with this. Is I wonder what aside from inflation, like there's a lot of conversation now about like what minimum wage equivalencies were, 40 years ago versus now, because you kind of get into this weird ballpark of like what real like buying power versus inflation.
Right. I feel like buying power is a better metric.
Right. Well, and like there's this whole thing about like is
because you have to balance the whole picture like against like cost of living,
right,
and a cost like what expectations were to buy things and whatnot.
Right. And I mean, I guess like
also there's like a lot of stuff we buy now that we didn't buy back then, and maybe it's cheaper now versus less expensive. Like your phone does everything now. Like how much would it cost to buy all those things that did all those things in 1980 versus buying one phone, which seems very expensive now? I don't know. It's a complicated conversation.
And I guess like if I was just shooting straight minimum wage arguments, I want to say minimum wage in like the mid 80s was around $3. I could be off.
I have no idea. I was a child.
Which means at $950, it would take you about 300 hours of work to buy one. Well, now minimum wage is ballpark $10, depending on where you're at.
Sure.
In California, I think it's at least $10. So if you want to
buy
buy
$11.25,
if you want to buy a $3,000 guitar, you're still doing about 300 hours of work.
Yeah.
So I mean, there is kind of that weird angle. One piece
is that like if someone's working a minimum wage job 30 hours a week, that's 10 weeks.
Yeah. I mean,
a fifth,
not counting taxes.
A fifth of your year to earn a Les Paul.
Yeah. Now, one thing I did look up just for fun.
Did I do that? Numbers right? 10 weeks is a fifth of a year. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Is Fender is in the process of phasing out the standard series. Or at least
now, do their
that's
standards mean the same thing that Gibson standards do? Is it an industry term that's the same across the board?
No. Because actually, after 2018, maybe.
I'm just trying to draw this video out as long as I can.
After 2018, there might not be a Fender standard guitar anymore.
What? There will be no standard Fender. How will we judge what a standard Fender is anymore?
The discussion is that the discussion is that the Fender.
It's almost like it's an arbitrary term.
It is an arbitrary term. I see what you did there. The Fender Standard Stratocaster is the Mexican-made Stratocaster, and it's supposed to be getting replaced with the Player Series. And with that replacement is an 8%.
Is Gibson going to come out with the Player Series?
8% price increase. The Fender American Standard Stratocaster has already been replaced with, I believe, the Fender American Professional Series. So suddenly, the standard guitar is for people who play in their bedrooms and are poor teenagers, but the professional is for professionals.
I mean, that's how it works out,
I guess.
I feel like the standard would just be the standard. Like that's the one everyone would want to buy.
The Mexican one.
Yeah, so Mexican standard.
So don't buy the American one.
I think that the Mexican standard would be the peso. That's what they base everything off of, right?
But then you have to convert it to dollars. bad jokes.
Bad jokes.
So I think I don't know what all this pricing means. It just means that the guitar is expensive.
It's an expensive guitar.
You know, earlier you said you wanted to hear from people what they think that a Gibson price would be worth, or what that the actual real value of these instruments are. I'd actually be really interested in hearing from anyone who saw the 2019 price list and said, "Nope, I'm out."
Yeah, and said
that extra
I want to hear from
$100 is a bridge too far.
But I want that person to be someone who, it's fine. It's great that you have a bunch of money. We need you to spend that money. I want to hear from someone who, like, as a, the thing that they do, they buy a Gibson almost every year from the current line. I know there's people out there that do that. I want to hear from someone who does that and has pictures to prove it. Like, here's my collection, and they say, "Yep, this is the year where it got too expensive. I can't deal with it anymore." That 3%.
And there definitely has been
and also if you have been saving your whole life or whatever to get this one guitar, and you were just like, I have to have the newest, best, goodest Gibson that comes out, and now I finally have the money, and then they put out the prices, and you're like, $100 more. Now I can't do it this year. I want to hear from that person.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. I want to hear from the person who was surprised that they are suddenly priced out.
Now here's the next thing I want to hear, Steve.
Yes.
For you personally.
Yes.
Because a lot of this is subjective based on your income and what your values are and how you view the brand. Is Gibson too expensive? Personally speaking.
I mean,
you can look at it from their entire history. I'm not talking about this year. I'm talking about in general.
I think that there are certain numbers that once you hit them are harder to conceptualize, even though I make more money than I did 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. The idea that...
Oh, you got 2 kids now.
I do have. I put my paper down. I need it back. The fact that a Les Paul Studio this year is $1,700, that feels like way too much.
Right.
2015...
Because Studio is their base,
it's their base.
It's no
nice model.
It's no binding.
The Studio now has binding
on the neck,
only on the neck, which is super weird.
I would much prefer it on the body than the neck. I don't know.
Yeah,
that's me. I think that little binding on the edge really pops. To me, my personal answer is that I'm never gonna buy a new Gibson.
Sure.
I might buy something that's in the range of that Double Cut Junior,
right?
To treat myself someday, but it would have to have much better, more expansive features than the Double Cut Junior. I'm not going to buy a wraparound stop tail for almost $900.
Right, and I think they've had models in the past that were interesting. If what we've seen is the complete low to high end and lineup for 2019, and everything else that comes out. Because they'll come out with more models, almost guaranteed.
Oh, yeah, totally. They only have 2 pages of 2019 models right now, where previous years had 4 and 5.
Yeah, I think...
They always release stuff throughout the year.
I wrote down on a different piece of paper that I left in my office that in 2018, there were a total of 40 Les Paul models. They did the Year of the Dog model... They did,
but a lot of those were custom shop stuff.
They did a lot of weird one-off
the
custom
boogie
shop,
vans,
the boogie van. So right now we have, I think, 7 Les Paul models. It'll be interesting to see if they do have the Studio and the Studio Tribute, which is Studio Tribute is a satin finish model. It's probably replacing the Studio Faded line. But even that one, the Studio Tribute at $1,200, I mean, that feels a little... That feels like it's not quite worth it. But then, I don't know. I remember them doing the Les Paul. They just call it the Les Paul Faded. Years ago for $800.
Isn't that the one our friend Daniel had?
Yes.
I remember those being a really great value because they were solid, actual Les Paul feeling guitars.
They were a real hit or miss.
They were just they were faded. They didn't have a glossy finish on them, and the bells and whistles.
Well, they were faded finish and they were solid mahogany.
The ones that I picked up, I thought were great. I know some of them were not as good.
And I mean, I guess that's the other thing with the Studio is typically the lowest end model that has a maple cap and a mahogany body.
Okay.
Though again, in previous years, the CM model had both of those features. It was relatively unfinished, faded. The CM only had a single pickup. and it had a wrap around, so it didn't have the
Right.
tom. So those were kind of like other features that kind of they used to get that price point down for the CM.
You know too much about this, Steve.
I've been researching it in preparation for this video. So
Do you, outside of a personal opinion, do you think that Gibsons are too expensive versus the rest of the industry? Like, there's so many great guitars out there now for really inexpensive. Do you think Gibson needs to catch up with the times by lowering prices to meet that? Or do you think that they should keep on doing what they do?
I think in some ways Gibson is trying to maximize out on being at the end of the, not being solely, but being a like a bit of a lifestyle brand.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I would say like all of your big guitar manufacturers are to an extent lifestyle brands.
Well, a lot of them have a lifestyle division where it's like, here's like the custom Strat with like a ridiculous finish that one guy made,
Right.
you know, and things like that.
But I mean, like,
hang this up as an art piece.
Beyond that, I mean, there are,
and there's like super crazy expensive Ibanez's
sure,
and stuff. And,
but I mean, I think Ibanez has a little bit of that, maybe not as big. I think at least the big American brands. I mean, think about it, like we're here talking about Gibson, but at the end of the day, like I consider myself a Fender guy.
oh yeah, totally.
Like I'm a Fender guy.
I mean, you look behind me and see that like Fender style guitars are my jam more than anything
and
else.
I know acoustic, you know, in the acoustic world, you have guys who are Martin guys or
Yeah.
guys who are Taylor guys. And I got a guy at my work who is who actually would probably say that he's a Yamaha guy. Like he really loves Yamaha's higher end acoustic guitars. And, you know, so, and as soon as you get your brand to a point where you are a blank guy, that brand has become a lifestyle brand for you because that
Also,
brand represents you in more than just, this is an instrument that I play, but it's saying like, this is the quality that I aspire to, or this is an aesthetic that I aspire to. So I think Gibson is playing off of that.
Yeah,
Being a
absolutely.
lifestyle brand and being able to say, look, it doesn't,
And that's why people get so upset anytime they change any minute detail.
Right.
They're like, my identity, my personal identity, you've ruined it, you know?
Yeah, and
the tattoo on the back of my calf doesn't make sense anymore.
I think, you know, for the person, even the person you were saying who's like the guy who buys a Les Paul Standard every year, the fact that, okay, have a wall and I started collecting Les Paul Standards in,
yeah.
you know, 2001. So I've got a wall of 18 identical Les Pauls, except for that garbage 2015 year. And all of a sudden, like, I'm going to put up a 2019 Les Paul Standard, but now it's got an
It'd be funny
asymmetrically
if
contoured neck.
every time there's a weird, like, quirky year for Gibson, that person just puts a different guitar in that year.
Right.
Like,
Well, so
they
I
just
mean,
go wild and they buy, like, a Steinbrenner or something like that.
and so, I mean, like, for that person, the thing that we put out at the beginning of the video saying, like, well, if you really want a traditional Les Paul, you should be getting the traditional model.
Right.
If you want one that's built like the way they were in 58, which is also like a funny comment I've been seeing around is, why is that the Les Paul Standard? Why isn't the 54 or the 56 the Les Paul Standard?
I don't know.
I mean, I know why, but it's, you know, it's a
Yeah.
funny idea.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's probably, I'm guessing that person exists.
Sure.
The person who, you know, doesn't want to have an instrument that says Les Paul Standard on it, knowing, oh, this has dip switches where nobody can see them.
Right.
Or the neck on this is like I said, it's a asymmetrical carve instead of like a standard, like a traditional rounded
I want to
carve.
put my hands on that neck. It sounds interesting. I don't know if I'd want to own one like that, but it sounds interesting, that crazy carve.
It's the whole idea that
It like shifts with your hand as you go down.
Gibson has kind of changed the way that they're structured, where the Les Paul traditional is effectively what the standard used to be. The Les Paul high powered is their basically
Like their
super Les
experimental-
Paul.
Yeah.
So a super Strat, but it's a Les Paul. And then the standard is kind of incorporating features in both directions.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's kind of interesting to me.
I feel like the standard, if I owned a recording studio,
Right.
and I had a bunch of money to buy a Les Paul that had a bunch of, like covered a lot of ground, where if someone came in and like their guitar wasn't working out, I could grab it and be like, we're going to use this.
Yeah.
Because it has a dip switch feature that's exclusively for plugging direct into like a DAW or recording board and stuff
really?
like that. Yeah, like the last thing on the dip switch does something with transient frequencies or something like that. In a video, they were explaining that it's a recording thing. And it just gives you all the different, push-pull options and stuff like that, where you can be like, let's set up this guitar for this recording, and here we go. Like, in my head, that's like the perfect environment for that guitar.
And I mean, it's actually a really interesting point, because I've, again, seen this comment as well, that the Les Paul high powered is probably the model in the current Gibson lineup that Les Paul would have actually played.
Oh, totally. He loves crazy switches and stuff.
Les Paul, like from the 1970s on, was playing Les Paul recording models.
Yeah.
Like these weird pickups and like settings and all these things. Like the Les Paul, the standard for the man Les Paul was not the Les Paul standard.
No, that's for sure.
So, from that perspective, a lot of people aren't going to go down that kind of creative path necessarily, and not everyone should have to. Like, Les Paul was a unique player, a very unique player.
Yeah.
And I mean,
and a good unique player.
Yeah. And there's a lot of like weird semantic arguments, I think, like that. Like, again, like in 1958, like, oh, Les Paul, like in the 70s, the Les Paul became the standard for hard rock, a style of music that did not exist in 1958. Mm-hmm. So, you want to buy a Les Paul standard that you can use for your Led Zeppelin tribute band? Sorry, this is the Les Paul standard. You can only use it for music that existed in 1958 or 1960 or whatever.
Have fun with your doo-wop.
Right. Or your covers of Rumble.
Yeah. Hey, I'm not going to complain about that.
Rocket 88. That's a song I was thinking of.
Well, let's put a bow on this and get out of here. You can go get some food for lunch. Maybe we should both go to lunch. I don't have
I have food
kitchen here anymore.
In my desk.
Oh, you brought
we
food
can
to
go out
work.
to lunch.
Yeah,
Whatever.
we'll figure it out.
We'll put on the dime.
Thanks for watching, everybody.
Bye.
Please like, subscribe, dislike, leave us
some nasty comments.
Rude and nasty comments.
Yeah.
And support us on Patreon. Later.
Bye.